You're on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome to the show. Good to have you with us. We've got two good shows lined up for you tonight. Of course, I've got a couple of co-hosts joining me, and it has been a big week so far. We had the government report on UAPs, which we'll discuss thoroughly later in the show, but that was released. Ike McFadden's just smiling like crazy because you're wanting to say, I told you so, aren't you, Ike?
I'll wait till we really have time to get into that. I've got a lengthy I told you so.
Oh, well, thank you. Good to know. Pete Haviland is our producer. Pete, you didn't tell us so. Did you expect anything from the report?
Actually, it's pretty much what I thought it would be.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your wisdom, Pete. We'll check in with you later in the show. Pete Haviland, our producer, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a great show lined up for you. We're going to start off talking about the Amityville Horror. Ike, I know you and Pete probably back in the 70s remember the movie. First, there was the book. It was some incredible stuff. When the book came out, it kind of gripped the nation. Then you had the movie with James Brolin. I think it was before he met Barbara Streisand. But James Brolin did a great job. They played the Lutzes in the movie. Do you remember the movie, Ike? Where you were what, probably 5 or 6 at that time?
Todd, I resent the implication that I was alive in the 70s, but I do have a memory of my memory from a child, because I was always into horror movies, was there were always like these 2 movies that were considered the really scary ones that, you know, if you were young, maybe you didn't want to watch. And it was The Exorcist and the Amityville Horror. Yeah,
it was a crazy movie. I know Pete remembers it. You remember the movie. Did you go see the movie in theaters when it came out, Pete?
Not in the 70s. But yeah, actually I did. My grandparents actually took me to it.
Well, believe it or not, I read the book when it first came out.
I did too.
It was crazy. It was scary as could be. The movie very much played well on the book, at least I thought at the time. But the movie sparked a number of sequels, which came out in the years, and they kind of went in all various crazy directions. I think there was an Amityville 3D at one time, and there was a remake with Ryan Reynolds. I'm sure that was probably in the top of your list.
It was, but I want to pick up on something Pete said. You said your grandparents took you to see the Amityville Horror as a child.
Yes. My dad told me to wrangle my grandparents into taking us, not to tell them it was R-rated, and told them it was PG. So we took them in there, and boy, we caught a lot of hell from that.
Yeah, there you go. That explains a lot. Okay. All right. Well, you know, a lot of things have happened since the movie. Of course, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted of murdering his family, including his siblings and his parents. He recently died in prison. I don't know if you guys remember the story. Pete, I think you posted the story on the Full Spectrum Project.
Yes, yes, we did. I believe they said it was natural causes, I think.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. One thing that was crazy, and I didn't know that till we started reading in the show notes regarding our guest tonight, was that the Amityville Horror had a connection to the Conjuring movies, specifically to Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were the subjects of the Conjuring movies. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. Ike, did you know there was a connection there?
I think I did, and that was probably either through hearing you or Pete talk about it. But yeah, I had heard that.
Yeah, I had no idea there was a connection with this. Anyway, we're going to take you back to 112 Ocean Avenue. It's the place of the Amityville Horror. The DeFeo family was brutally murdered in their home, a murder that to this day is still shrouded in supernatural mystery, or was it? How exactly did the murderer manage to shoot his whole family with a shotgun? No one heard the gun. It was a deafening noise. How did that happen? Did something dark assist in this tragedy? Well, nearly 1 year after the tragedy took place, George and Kathy Lutz would attempt to call this murder scene home. They were the two who were the subjects of the book in the movie, The Amityville Horror. And only the last 28 days that they stayed in the house with the family, fleeing a haunted house in terror as something the world has never seen.
So tonight we're very lucky to have with us one of the reporters who actually covered the story. This is Laura Didio. She's an investigative journalist and she's worked with New York's Channel 5, amongst others. And she's also produced several documentaries, including History's Mysteries, Shock Docs, and My Amityville Horror. So Laura, thanks a lot. Welcome to the show. How did you first get involved with this case?
Well, I was working at Channel 5 as a news assistant at the time, and the then news director of Channel 5, Mark Monsky, had asked me to produce a series, a 2-week series, different episodes on the paranormal, different things, you know, psychics, whatever, astrologers. And at that time, at the end of January 1976, just as I was in the middle of doing that, the Lutzes gave a press conference with William Weber, who had been Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense attorney at the trial. And in this press conference, which was mainly attended by local news media and newspapers, so Newsday, the Long Island Press, etc., the Lutzes basically for the first time said that they had contacted William Weber just after they had fled the house in terror from unseen forces. They did not specify what those forces were, but, you know, they did not say they were haunted by the DeFeos. In fact, nobody has ever said that the house is haunted by the murdered DeFeos in the last 4.5 decades. They didn't say it was a demonic presence, but they said they left the house. Now, you can imagine that this was a perfect storm of events for people who wanted to believe that there was something supernatural going on, given the fact that 6 people, including 4 young people, had been violently murdered at the time. So at that point, Channel 5 set about me getting that story, and that meant trying to find the Lutzes, because it was almost as if, well, not as almost, William Weber was in fact almost acting like their agent or PR person, marketing person, and things were going through him. So in calling William Weber, he had all sorts of plans. He said, well, you know, we're going to go in to the house with a group of white witches, Wiccans, and perform an exorcism. And Channel 7, the ABC affiliate, Eyewitness News, they were going to go in and film it, but Channel 5 could probably go in as well. Then all of a sudden, after a week or two of this, and not getting any closer to the Lutzes, dead silence, because there was some sort of split between William Weber and the Lutzes. What I did at that point was try to contact George Lutz at his office. He was running his family's business. It was a surveying firm, the William H. Parry surveying firm. I left a message for him. He called me back and he said, can you come out and meet with me and my wife? It was on a Saturday. So I said, sure. So I didn't even tell anybody at the station that I was doing it, because what if I didn't get the story?
Yeah.
You know, I'm 20 years old, so I didn't want my career to crash and burn before it got off the ground.
And you had to have a lot of skepticism towards this too. Being a reporter at the time, a TV news reporter, you got to go into it kind of skeptical. At least it sounds like they were kind of juggling you around.
Well, everybody was being juggled around. But what I had to go in with was objectivity. You have to understand, at that time, coming post Exorcist, the Exorcist movie, which scared the bejesus out of everyone. Okay, and knowing that William Weber was working with the Lutzes to try and get an appeal for Ronald DeFeo Jr. on the grounds of not just insanity, but possession. That would have, put Weber's career into the stratosphere at the time. Yeah. So that was a pretty good gambit if you're William Weber, especially in the mid-70s, coming on the heels of The Exorcist. So it didn't matter to Channel 5 or anyone else at the time whether or not this was the biggest hoax, on the planet. They were still going to cover it, because if it was a hoax, you were going to get viewers. If it wasn't a hoax, or presumed not to be a hoax, that it was the real thing, you were going to get viewers. But whatever, there were going to be people lined up on either side to debate the issue. So it was a win-win as far as potential ratings went.
And how did the Warrens get involved with this? I mean, I first obviously learned of the Warrens when the Conjuring movies came out and they made the news. I know one of them just recently passed, it seems like in the last couple of years. How did they get involved with this? I don't remember them from the movie. They weren't in the original movie or the book, but how did they get involved?
That would be me. So basically what had happened was when I met the Lutzes, I said, you folks need help, because the Lutzes, whatever people think of them, whether you believe the story or you disbelieve it, at the very least, these two seemingly middle-class people didn't have any background of fraud or anything like that, running scams. They were very, very scared. So even if they were delusional or making it up, these two were a couple of good actors if they were phonies. I mean, Meryl Streep and Robert De Niro couldn't have done a better job. So I wanted to put them in touch with somebody. And of course, at Channel 5, we wanted to go into the house with paranormal investigators. And at the time, I originally called Hans Holzer, because he had done a documentary at Channel 5 on a haunted discotheque down in Greenwich Village, in the late 60s, and it was a big ratings winner. Hans, unfortunately, he basically said, well, let's do this right. Let's put together a documentary. I want to make money, and et cetera, et cetera. I said, Hans, I'm sorry. You're deserving of the money, and certainly you're right, but this is the news division, not the entertainment division. We have no money. That we want to go in here tomorrow with a news crew. Are you on board? He says, no, I'm not interested. And again, keep in mind that this was not a huge story at the time. It was a very local to Long Island story. It really hadn't even reached Hans's ears in New York City.
Right.
So then myself and Marvin Scott and Steve Bauman, who were working on the thing, I said, well, we'll have to get somebody else. And Marvin Scott and I had both worked with the Warrens prior to this. I had a radio show on Fordham and at Fordham University and had interviewed them. Marvin had interviewed them on Channel 5 about a haunted church. I called up Ed and Lorraine. They always answered their phone. I said, have you heard about this? They said no. They asked me to give them the background of the case, which I had been researching at this point for about 3 weeks. And I had also covered the original DeFeo murder trial, by the way. And I said, can you come down tomorrow? And Ed and Lorraine Warren did not ask for any money. They just said, can Channel 5 pay our tolls and gas money? Said, sure. So that's what we did. We went in the next day.
Well, so let me ask you this, Laura. What did the local authorities, like the Amityville police, what did they think of you bringing in someone like the Warrens?
Well, at the time, they didn't think anything because, again, it was very, very early on. So we didn't really have to get permission from the Amityville police or the town to go in. We just drove out with the Warrens, went in, although a few strange things happened even before we got into the house. We were supposed to meet George Lutz on the front lawn or at the local pizza place to get the keys so we could go in. And there was a lot of interference and things. This is in the days before cell phones, when you actually had to use the phone booth on the corner, and he wasn't where he said he was going to be. So it took a while for us to hook up. And in fact, Lorraine and I were, and it was cold. We were standing out there trying to reach George Lutz, couldn't find him. So we eventually, I had to go into the Amityville Police Department and ask, because they had his number, to try and reach him. And that's what we did. They were none too happy with us because the chief, who had to give permission, was on his dinner hour. So he didn't care about reporters and psychics. And the whole thing was starting to become problematic for the Amityville Police Department in terms of policing the area. Once that press conference with William Weber and the Lutzes had taken place in late January, people started flocking to it. So we went in that night with Ed and Lorraine Warren, who had developed at the time a very good reputation locally in Connecticut and the immediate tri-state area. But they were not the national names at the time that, they are now.
Did you have dinner? I'm reading my show notes. You had dinner with George Lutz and Lorraine Warren, and Lutz had shared something with you. Could you maybe tell us about that? What happened there?
Okay, well, there were a couple of different occasions. So when I met the Lutzes initially out at their office, and they said they would give Channel 5 the exclusive. After that, I said, I'll put you in touch with the Warrens. And I did go out on a subsequent occasion to meet with the Lutzes at their mother, at Kathy's mother's house, Kathy Lutz. That's where they were staying. And it was at that meeting where the Warrens were not present, that they played a tape for me. I think that's what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And they said, listen, we want you to listen to this tape, and we want you to know ahead of time that we're really not proud of ourselves here. And on the tape, it was a discussion with them and William Weber, in which William Weber was suggesting that they, over several bottles of wine, as has been, reported, that they put the house in a trust, and that the four of them, Kathy, George, William Weber, and his law partner at the time, Bernard Burton, would then basically get book and movie deals, etc. And interestingly, and one of the things that always strikes me about, that tape was listening to George Lutz and Kathy Lutz, who were saying, who were going along with it, seemingly on the tape, saying, George came out and said, well, I don't want the children involved. Kathy had 3 children by her first marriage, Danny, who was 9, Christopher, who was 7, and Melissa, who was 5. He said, I don't want the kids involved at all. And I remember distinctly William Weber's response, oh, no, the children, no, we won't have them involved at all. God bless them. And after they stopped playing the tape, they said, we want you to know we have nothing to, we're ashamed of what we did. We're not in touch with William Weber anymore. Please don't talk to him about this. We want nothing to do with him. But this story is really true.
And why would they tape a conversation like that? Was it taped? And obviously they were worried about it getting out, correct?
No, they didn't seem to be worried about it getting out at all, because they basically offered this up right away to me. And, it's interesting because a lot of people have suggested that, I was a naive 20-year-old at the time and would fall for anything. Other people have suggested that I might have been in on it. My interest was in getting the story, and I did genuinely want to help them, because they did honestly seem terrified. Now, again, it could have been a big act, but if so, they were Academy Award-winning performances.
Right.
So, but what it showed to me was, number one, William Weber had an acute sense of marketing, because what he said on that tape is, I'm sure we can get 2 or 3 books, 2 or 3 movies. That's pretty darned ambitious for early 1976.
And they did. they were able to get a little bit out of it.
They did, but I think they were not shirking from saying this. Now, their motives may not have been purely altruistic and may have been self-serving, because they had to have known that William Weber was going to tell his own tale. And as we've seen subsequently, he did not want to back off this story and was doing everything he could to stay involved, presumably to make money.
So step forward a little bit in time. When you guys went into the house on this first visit, can you tell us a little bit about how that went?
Yes. So Lorraine and Ed knew the general background, the murders, some of what the Lutzes had said. At that point, they had not yet met the Lutzes. So we went into the house and we went around, and Lorraine had her impressions, and she walked into a couple of rooms, one of them being Louise and Ronald DeFeo Sr.'s master bedroom, and backed right out and said, oh, she could just feel blood and, angst, and that, there was a murder there. Now, that was a pretty good guess. Okay, by the way, you didn't have to be psychic to know that it happened, but she walked in and she almost it was like walking into a wall. She backed out. And when she went into Ronnie's bedroom, she really had to get out of there fast. She did not like it. When she got to the second floor stair landing, which seemed to be a focal point for a lot of activity in terms of what was being reported by some people when they went there, she really felt it was oppressive. It was she ended up getting a headache. She went into the sewing room, which I believe had been Allison, the younger daughter's room. And there she sort of felt a sense of peace. But basically her take on it, and Lorraine Warren, by the way, self-described herself as a light trance medium. That is, she did not go under in the traditional sense of what we see when a hypnotist is working with somebody, or a deep trance medium. She was aware of what was going on around her, and Ed would talk her through things and ask her for her perceptions. But they felt like there was a demonic force, an unseen entity. They did not think it was the ghost of the murdered DeFeos.
Wow. Some incredible stuff. We're talking with Laura Didio, and if you're just joining us, Laura worked for Channel 5 in New York, and she was one of the original reporters who covered the Amityville Horror before it was a book, before it was a movie, before the rest of the world knew about it and became a horror sensation as it's grown into over the decades. Laura, you've also produced, you're a producer now as well as a journalist, and you produced a number of documentaries, including My Amityville Horror. And I imagine if people would like to know more about your experiences on the scene and covering this, they could watch your documentary as well.
Yes, it's on all the streaming services. And thank you very much for elevating my participation, what I did in My Amityville Horror, which was actually the brainchild of Eric Walter, who is a wonderful director, writer, and he was the executive producer and ended up getting the financing behind this. I was a producer on it, and I was also the on-camera reporter, and that dealt with talking with Danny Lutz as an adult, right, and recounting and recalling his experiences and what had happened there.
And if you haven't seen the documentary, you can find it on streaming services. Laura, it's fascinating what you've been bringing to light. And of course, Ed and Lorraine Warren, still a presence today with the Conjuring films. We appreciate you joining us and shedding some light on this. It's certainly a fascinating subject. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you. All right, we are going to talk a bit about something. First, I want to get back to this. Ike, your take on the whole Amityville Horror. I mean, it sounded like, from what Laura was saying, the first lawyer who worked with the Lutzes, certainly a marketing genius, and knew what he had when he was working with them.
Yeah, I mean, no, that certainly got my antenna up as well, because I've worked tangentially in news, as I know you have worked directly in it. But at the same time, I mean, all of the entire story could remain true, and that the fact that you have a very astute marketing attorney attaching himself to it does not in itself mean anything about the story. It's just, something to take advantage of.
Right. Well, we are going to move on because we want to discuss something that came out over the last week. We've been talking about it. I was somewhat excited to see it. The UAP report was released by the United States government. Of course, a 9-page report released on Friday from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And if you go through the report, I'm going to let Ike and Pete share their thoughts, and I'll give mine. But I'll give my first thing, Ike. It was a 9-page report. 1 page was a cover page. Okay. All right. And then you had 2 pages that were appendix pages. So you didn't have a whole lot in the report, but you didn't expect a whole lot, did you?
I did not, although I'll throw this out there. I forget what government official said, but someone in the last 48 hours answered a question. Someone asked, well, hey, this is the public one. What is the one that was sort of circulated privately? What does that contain? And the answer was, well, there's some technical data in there that's classified, but the basic conclusion is no different. So I don't know, Pete, we gotta, I've been a skeptic about this. I love to believe in UFOs, but the kind of thing I keep coming back to is, well, we're 50 years into blurry photos. And at some point you got to be like, come on, guys. What do you make of it?
Well, back in 47, when we were talking about Roswell, there was a lot of cover up of what was going on there, whether you believed it or not, but there was of the Roswell incident. They did have a lot of, like I said, a lot of cover up going on. So I just kind of figured that they would just kind of follow along the same way. I know that there's been a manual that has come up, I think it's SOM 101, of how they would treat a UFO that has been downed and how to handle the situation. And in there, it talks about, how to cover up the data and all that. So I just really don't think it would be anything different than it is today. You just give folks just enough of what they want to hear, and throw a whole lot of static on it. And it's pretty much what that report was. I think that there's something out there. I think that there's intelligent life out there myself. What that is, where it is, I'm not really too sure. But as you also had mentioned too about a lot of blurry photos, there are some pretty good shots of some things. With today's situation that goes on with apps and stuff, and the way that you can create things digitally, it brings more skeptical things to my mind about what's going on out there. But
even on that point, I would actually, and then I'm sort of playing devil's advocate to myself, the fact that the stuff that's released is still so bad quality. I sort of think, like, if you were really going to try to, pull something over, you could do a lot better than this. So the fact that it is so bad makes me think, well, that's probably real, because no one in the right mind would put out stuff that looks like this.
Well, and I tend to think that Bigfoot is blurry. So
one thing, okay, but wait a second here. We've got pretty good Tic Tac video, the Tic Tac UFOs. There's some video that was shot from the USS Nimitz, I believe, back in 2004. So there is some decent video taken on a FLIR camera of shows something making crazy maneuvers that literally are physically impossible to do, okay, with the technology we have. But here's my problem with this thing, because I'm going to go on a rant. Page 2 of this summary, it says executive summary. The first sentence lets you know you're going to get a whole bunch of nothing. It says the limited amount of high quality reporting on unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent of UAP. That tells you we're going to tell you nothing in the next few pages. You got 6 pages of this, but 3 others are just a cover and appendixes. So we don't have much to tell you. It goes on to talk about this. Then it says on the same page, UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. Really? You think so? I don't know. We don't have the technology to do it. The Russians may, the Chinese may, but we don't have the technology to do that. Okay. Then it goes on a few other things. Here's what I really love about it. First off, they don't talk about any of the instances that sparked this report, the video that was released a couple of years ago. They don't talk about the Tic Tac video, the U.S. Nimitz video. Don't talk about that at all. What they tell you is UAP probably lack a single explanation, but they give you some ideas. Ike, you'll probably love this. Airborne clutter. I don't know about you, but you tell me airborne clutter that can travel at 40,000 to 80,000 miles an hour. I don't know.
Here again, I'll play devil's advocate to you. The way this is written, it says appears to show. Now, to me, it's a perfectly decent explanation. You've got, because you've looked through cameras and video a lot, the relative motion of you, if you are moving, can make something appear like it's moving in some strange direction. So the fact that, at least from the video, the fact that they say, it's got this calculating that it's moving contrary to physics, well, it may well appear that way on the video, but that does not mean, in fact, that's happening.
But they have it on radar, too. They have a radar imprint of these. Here's another one, natural atmospheric phenomena. What the hell is that? Anyone? Swamp gas? I don't know. It could be a USG or industrial development programs. Okay, so it's a program we're not going to tell you about. We may be involved in, but we're going to say we're not. That I'd buy. But it also could be a foreign adversary system, such as Russia, China, or another nation. Or it just could be other.
Well, and I would go, other doesn't necessarily mean aliens. It could mean, just a weird video parallax angle on something. And
right.
And also, again, to play devil's advocate here, even if you have radar that appears to show something, that is not the same thing as something actually happening. Now, I'll be happy to learn I'm wrong about that, but I'm saying we have to look at this very carefully about what in fact is said. And a lot of it appears to be very lawyerly language. Something appears to, but we don't know and we don't have enough information. Well, that could mean anything.
Well, you got a bunch of bureaucratic lawyers who put their best in this one to give you a whole bunch of nothing. Last thing it talks about is UAP threatened flight safety and possible national security with ongoing airspace concerns and potential national security challenges. One thing it does at the end of the report, and maybe Pete can talk a bit about this, it does say that we need, because you don't hear from the Air Force at all in this report. Where are these guys? You don't hear from them at all in this report, but it does say we need to bring together all of our forces to start reporting this, because for some time, and Pete, I'm sure could talk more about this, the government was telling the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, whoever saw this, do not put it in a report, or they would hide the reports from us. What they've released last Friday, quite honestly, we're paying these guys, they're our tax dollars. It was ridiculous. It was nothing.
Well, we also have to look at the report itself. Did they fulfill their obligation to cover, or lack of cover, the information given? Is it within the scope of the law to provide what has been said to because I know that this was written into that COVID bill. So to get them out of having to go really deep into it, I mean, did they get themselves out of it by all the legalese?
Well, I'm sure the bureaucratic lawyers could figure it out for us, but I'm sure they did. Apparently, and Ike, you were talking about this earlier. You've heard as well as I have as well. There was another addendum to this, more content that was classified that was released to some government officials that we haven't seen.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, and one thing I have to bear in mind is that, there may not be much in this report because there may not be much to report on. That is a possibility.
Or they could be hiding something. or not telling us everything.
That is possible, but let's loop back to the Amityville Horror now. The guy who died in jail, was it DeFeo? Is that his name?
Yeah, Ronald DeFeo Jr. Yeah.
Where were the Kennedys at that time?
Who knows? All these answers will be given to you on the next episode of the Road Beyond podcast. All right, guys, our next guest is on tap for our live audience on Facebook and YouTube. We will have another show coming up with another guest very shortly. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter as the Road Beyond podcast. And Ike, we also have a YouTube channel.
Yeah. So, and I think it's going live on that as well. But if you go to our channel, the Road Beyond podcast, you'll find all the past episodes, which I think are several thousand at this point.
And we're into the thousands at this point, and we're still free at this time. So that's one good thing right now. All right, folks, we're going to wrap up this show. Pete, stick around if you can.
Look forward to it.
All right, man. Okay, for Pete and Ike, I'm Todd Duplantis. We'll see you next time on the Road Beyond.